and it's far more likely to be that he picks some wrong targets. And, countries don't like being bullied, and leaders politically can't afford to look like they're just rolling over. So he may encounter resistance just because certain leaders, whether it's the Canadian Prime Minister, feel like they can't give him what he wants because it would be too embarrassing for them politically.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary. Then I was reprimanded by the fake news. They said, what about love, religion, and God? I said, I agree. Let's put God number one. Let's put religion number two. Love, I don't know. We got to put that number three, I guess, right? And then it's tariff. Because tariffs are going to make us rich as hell. It's going to bring our country's businesses back that left us.
There you go. A very beautiful word, but I think we'll all agree tariffs. It's beautiful. What's the word for tariffs in French? Maybe it's even more beautiful. Well, the Donald, he has been as good as his word. He has slapped a whopping 25% tariff on goods imported into the US from Canada and Mexico, and 10% tariffs on goods from China, effective as of today. Now, President Trump has long threatened to use tariffs to ensure greater cooperation from the countries on stopping illegal immigration and the smuggling of opioids. He also hopes that they're going to boost domestic manufacturing. So I'm joined now by Dmitry Grozoubinski, a former Australian trade negotiator and diplomat, and the author of Why Politicians Lie About Trade and What You Need to Know About It. Welcome to the show, Dmitry.
Good to be with you.
OK, well, you seem like a good man to ask. Is he lying now? Are the reasons that Donald Trump is stating for putting tariffs on the real reasons?
Well, I guess the first thing to say is it's not actually clear he has put tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He says he has, but no one can find any of the kind of mechanical steps that you would expect in terms of how, I guess, government works. So nobody's quite certain what to do at the border at the moment. So that is neither here nor there, and I'm sure that'll get sorted out, but it is emblematic of just the level of chaos and spontaneity around all of this. In terms of whether he is lying about his reasons, to the extent that he might be, he's doing it in a very Trumpian way, in the sense that he throws out 3 or 4 somewhat contradictory, overlapping reasons without letting you know which one he actually cares about. So with Mexico and Canada, he has named illegal border crossings. He has named the flow of fentanyl, which is an opioid, across the border. And he has also named the US trade deficit. So the fact that Americans buy more from Mexico and Canada than Mexicans and Canadians buy from the US. Now, all 3 of those are reasons, but it's really hard to work out why he's actually doing this and to what extent he's doing this for the long term versus, as he threatened with Colombia, as a way to kickstart a negotiation, earn a concession or 2, and call off the dogs.
I mean, his mandate and his power certainly feels greater than it did in 2016. And yet, how will he withstand the potential inflation that could result from these tariffs?
I mean, so there's a couple of things to think about here. I mean, he has the same powers as he did in his first term. The acts of Congress he'll be relying on are the same. He just seems a little bit better organized and more focused this time around in terms of wanting to use them. I would also warn that the U.S. economy is less trade exposed than just about any developed economy in the world. So part of his thinking might be, well, hold on. It's going to be quite a while until there are direct inflationary effects. And he'll have a lot of power to say, ooh, this one product, say Canadian oil, that's quite inflationary because we put it in our cars. I'm going to exempt Canadian oil. So from his perspective, he may be thinking 3 things. He may be thinking it's a long time until anyone notices the inflation. And in a conflicted media space, as your listeners in the UK will know, it is very difficult to post factum, trace back something happening on the shelves to a government decision. You learned all about that during the Brexit years. Secondly, he may be thinking, I can undo the most politically damaging parts of this. And third, again, he may be thinking, this may only be in place for a little while because these other countries will come to negotiate, they will come to make me offers, and I'll be able to take these off before the inflation really hits.
And so the war gaming of this is that the other countries will want to stave this off. Is there a point where if the global trading community were to withstand and have a more aggressive response to Trump that he might have to rethink?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, President Trump, in both terms and throughout his life, has often backed off when sort of bullying hasn't worked. I will say it's probably less likely to be sort of the whole world marches arm in arm against the Americans, and it's far more likely to be that he picks some wrong targets. And, countries don't like being bullied, and leaders politically can't afford to look like they are just rolling over. So he may encounter resistance just because certain leaders, whether it's the Canadian Prime Minister, feel like they can't give him what he wants because it would be too embarrassing for them politically. And then there might be resistance. It's much more likely to be that kind of bilateral resistance than any kind of, people taking to the streets and singing Les Miserables.
But how encouraged do you think that he was by the very short-term success he had? I think it was this week with Colombia. There were threats of trade, and then the planes that he wanted to take, deport people back, were moving again, and it all seemed to be smoothed out quite quickly. Was that a bit of a false dawn for him?
Well, I don't know if it was a false dawn. It was certainly for him a proof of concept in the microcosm. And in a lot of ways, it actually gave a lot of other countries some hope. Because if you look at what the Colombians actually did in practice, they pretty much just restored the status quo. It wasn't a big give to the US, and it got him off their case. So a lot of people started thinking a little bit more optimistically, saying, hey, he is going to rampage around and make threats and try to extort people. But when he does that to you, you can buy him off quite cheaply. You don't need to put anything real on the table necessarily. You can get him off your case with a few gimmies. But now he's targeting, like, the guns are much bigger, and he is targeting far larger and more economically significant to the US countries than Colombia. So it's a new day and a different ballgame.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Dmitry Grozoubinski, a former Australian trade negotiator and diplomat, and author of Why Politicians Lie About Trade and What You Need to Know About It.
Can you give us an update on the president's plan for his tariff agenda? He spoke a lot about this yesterday, and there's a couple of dates coming up that he's spoken to. Number one, February 1st, he's alluded to both the potential for tariffs for Canada and Mexico, but also China to take effect on those days. What's he thinking about that?
Yeah.
Should those countries expect that?
Again, he was asked and answered this question this past weekend when he took a lot of questions from the press, and he said that the February 1st date for Canada and Mexico still holds.
What about the China 10% tariff that he also had mused about last Tuesday going into effect on the same date?
Yeah, the president has said that he is very much still considering that for February 1st.
Separately, yesterday he talked also about sectoral tariffs on, for instance, pharmaceuticals as well as semiconductor computer chips. He talked about steel, aluminum, and copper. What's the timeline on those? Is that a similar sort of coming days thing?
Yeah, so when the president talked about that in his speech yesterday, that actually wasn't a new announcement. That was within a presidential memorandum that he signed in one of the first days here in the White House on his America First trade agenda. So there's more details on those tariffs in there. As far as a date, I don't have a specific date to read out to you, but the president is committed to implementing tariffs effectively, just like he did in his first term.
And finally, he also was asked on the plane when he gaggled about the potential for a universal tariff. He was asked maybe about 2.5%. There was a report about that. He said he wanted much bigger than that. Should we understand that these tariffs would add up? In other words, you might have country-specific tariffs like Canada, Mexico, China. You might have sectoral tariffs like on pharmaceuticals, as well as a potential universal tariff on top of that. Do these stack on one or the other, or would one sort of take precedence over another?
All I can point you to is what the president has said on this front. The February 1st date for Canada and Mexico, also the China tariff that he has discussed. He rejected the 2.5% tariff. He said that was a little bit too low. He wants it to be higher. I'll leave it to him to make any decisions on that front.